What's up, guys? Welcome back to Shop. Today's video we're going to be taking this copper scrubber and we're going to see if we can make a knife out of it. So this copper scrubber I got from the dollar store. I got 3 for $1, and I wanted to make sure that they are actually full copper. So after I clean them up with acetone to get any kind of residuals off, I cut one open and cut it into pieces. It serves two purposes: one, to check if it is actually fully copper, and two, to make it fit inside of my canister a little bit easier. Now they were full copper, so I'm hoping that they will work out in the canister and give us a little something to look at. And with that out of the way, we're going to go on ahead and start making our canister. I got 1/8 inch steel tubing, and we're going to cut it apart and add some end caps to it. Most makers that I see, they end up making the end cap on the inside and not just on top of the can. I gave up on that a long time ago. I felt it was an unnecessary step, so I just welded it to the top. And that is because my first press is always from top to bottom, so it doesn't matter if they're on the inside or not. Afterwards, I coat the inside with some white spray paint to help release the contents of the steel whenever I forge weld it all together. And we go on ahead and stuff our copper scrubbers in there. And now that we have our copper scrubbers in there, we're going ahead and fill in all the voids with steel powder. In this case, it is 1090 with 2% nickel, and that will give us a very nice contrast to the copper. One thing to note, there is a lot of voids, so this billet is primarily going to be steel powder, and it takes a lot of it. One thing I did drop the ball on is I should have measured before and after just to see how much powder we actually get in there, but it is a pretty hefty amount. Afterwards, I weld on the top as well, and we get it ready for our forging. Because we're working with copper, I decided to use the oven instead of the forge, just because it gives me a more controlled temperature, and as long as I am set to max, it will forge weld the copper powder at about 2000 degrees. As always, I press top to bottom first, and then I just work the billet around. The first press is the most important press, as that is what actually consolidates the billet and turns it into a block of steel. Afterwards, all I have to do is wiggle it around to get it completely free, and once I do, it comes off nice and easy thanks to the white spray paint that we prepped our canister with to begin with. Now, one thing that I did notice is that this guy has a lot of cracks in it. That is nothing new. When you're working with a billet that is primarily steel powder, it will crack like crazy. So I just went on ahead and kept forging it out. Now, this won't be the main part of the knife. I will be dividing it into two, and I will be using it as cladding with a coarse steel. That way we have good edge steel and we won't run into any kinds of issues. But I do need to work it down to about a quarter thickness, so I'm using my 1/4 inch kiss blocks to work them down. That way we can clean them up and stack them with our coarse steel. As you can see, the billets came out pretty rough, so I'm just cutting out the good steel, and I'm gonna remove all the cracked edges all the way around. As well as, once I have that done, I will be cutting the rest of my material to the exact same size as the outer cladding will be. This is 5160. It will be my coarse steel for this project, and I'm cutting it down to the same size as the rest of my layers. To make sure that everything sticks, I'm going ahead and add 2 copper layers in between, and that will make this knife into a gomai knife, which pretty much just means that it is comprised of 5 layers. My 2 outer cladding, my 2 copper layers, and my coarse steel. In the past, I used to weld my copper billets all the way around. I don't do that anymore because I am doing them inside of the oven, so I have a very controlled heat, and therefore I don't run into the issue of the copper trying to melt out. So as long as I have a couple spot welds just to hold everything together, the first press pretty much brazes the whole thing together, and from there we have a nice solid bond. If you don't have an oven and you can't have controlled precise heats, definitely I would recommend to weld all the way around it. In case you do overheat it, you have less of a chance of it spilling everywhere. So for most of my experiment knives, which is pretty much this guy, I don't really have a shape. I just kind of forge the billet out however way I can forge it, and from there I make whatever knife pretty much fits on the blank piece of steel that I have. In this case, I'm making a bit of a hidden tang butcher's knife just to make sure that I use the most amount of steel as I possibly can, just in case there is a bit of a pattern. We can make sure we have it show up on our final edge. Since I was trying to utilize the most amount of my steel, the grind went pretty quick and it was fairly easy. All I did was grind in my tip and my tang and grind off any kind of bad steel I had on the edge to make sure that we have a nice clean reveal. This surface ground finish came out very nicely, but at this point I am starting to worry about not having a copper pattern from the mesh in there. If I did have one, it would definitely pop out on the quench, which in this case it did look a little interesting, but not quite what I had it pictured in my mind. All right, guys, so we are out of the temper. It's looking good. We're pretty straight. Not too bad. I am worried about right here. If I can't get that perfect, we're going to have copper crossover. So I'm definitely worried about that. That's where I have my little spot right here, this crack, where I overpressed it a little bit. So if I have to, I might have to make the knife smaller. It is what it is. We're still going to get a functional knife. It's just going to be smaller. But hopefully it doesn't come to that. Other than that, the knife is coming out pretty good. I am worried about not having a pattern in there because even though that copper sponge does have copper in it, sometimes depending on how thin it is, sometimes it kind of just burns away. But I'm hopeful something will come out because the way it looked in whenever I heat treated it, it looked like something was in there. So at worst, we're going to have a smaller copper layer knife that's still going to look pretty nice. At best, we're going to have a full-sized copper knife with some interesting pattern in it. So I'm going to go on ahead and hit it on the surface grinder again, get it up to about 120, and then we're going to start grinding in our bevels. I must admit that the final grind on this knife was definitely a bit of a challenge, and that is because I had to be very careful with how much material I was taking off at a time. As I showed in the video, I had a very thin spot where the copper was very close to overlapping, and because of that I had a lot of issues with my grinding. Nonetheless, I did manage to get through it, but it was definitely a very close call, and it definitely took a lot longer than I had anticipated just because of having to baby the knife while also trying to keep the edge as straight as possible. Afterwards, I gone ahead and knocked down my spine and get rid of the little crack that I had on there, and we have nice clean steel and we are good to go for our hand sand. Alright guys, so we're done with hand sanding. It's looking pretty good. We're going to go ahead and start on our handle. So for our handle, we're going to be using this green spalted maple, and we're going to be pairing it with some black G10 and some copper spacers. So I think this guy's going to be looking pretty good. So I was a little stingy with the material, and I figured that if I cut out the pretty much what I needed plus a little bit extra, it would be good to go. But once I started actually working on it, I realized that I had given myself way too little of the copper and of the G10. But in my stubbornness, I said, I can make it work. So I did make it work, but it was a bit of a hassle to not overgrind that material and end up having to start all over from scratch after everything was said and done. So my next step is to bed the tang, and if you've never done this before, you don't know what it is. Pretty much what I'm doing here is I'm adding wax to the tang to make sure that nothing sticks to it, and I will be essentially doing a full glue up of everything but the tang. And what this does is allows me to fill in the cavity and make sure I have a nice solid placement for my tang. That way whenever I reference for my different angles and my different grinds, I can make sure that the tang always fits exactly in the same spot every time, and I don't have any kind of wobble, which I would have if I didn't take this step and I just glued together the top layers of the handle construction. Now this step isn't always necessary, it just really depends on the size of your hole and the thickness of your tang, but on average it is definitely a good thing to do whenever you have the opportunity to do so. In this case I'm using 5-minute epoxy, so about 3 or 4 minutes into the dry I can go on ahead and pop it right out. Alright guys, so it's been a few minutes and you can see my epoxy is right here, and it's stiffening up. So pretty much it's ready to take apart. It's pretty dry. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take these guys off. It's not fully dry yet. This is 5-minute epoxy, so it sets up a lot faster. It's been a few minutes, but I'm gonna put it right here and I'm just gonna give it a couple taps and it pops right out. So now this is gonna fully set up in a couple hours and we're gonna be good to go. And every time I put it back in, it's always gonna be in the exact same spot. It's not gonna move around or anything. And it's gonna have the full shape of the actual tang in there. And once I do my glue up, all I'm gonna do is make some notches in my tang just to help it hold on a little bit better. And then I'll epoxy, and I use a lot less epoxy for the final glue up since the whole cavity is already full. One more thing to keep in mind, you see all these little pieces like right here and right here where I have epoxy. Just use a little bit of acetone to weaken it and to wipe it right off. If you don't, you're gonna definitely regret it because it's gonna harden up. It is gonna be a lot harder to remove, and you might actually have to do a little bit of hand sanding to fix that. And the knife's already hand sanded, so the last thing I want to do is hand sand it again. As you can see, I definitely didn't leave a lot of material to my top layers, and though I was able to grind it in, it had very little leeway in the grind. So for future builds, I'll definitely not be very stingy with it and give myself a little bit of extra material. because I was definitely pretty worried about it. And now we're moving into our edge. Here's where we're going to reveal if we have any of that copper in there or not, and it really does not look like we have any. I do like the overall look of it, but the experiment was a bit of a dud. Now, I do have a theory about what happened, and that would be that the copper just burned out. If the copper is too thin, it won't really create any kind of a pattern, and it'll just kind of burn off. I don't know if it exactly does that and burns off, but I do know that I experimented before with copper powder, and depending on the percentages that I used between powder and the steel powder that I combined it with, unless I was doing 50-50 or maybe slightly less, a 40-60, no real pattern showed up. So once I did the actual forge welding, I'm pretty sure that the copper melted, and then just it was too little of the percentage of the overall billet that it kind of just disappeared into the rest of the billet. I don't know if that makes sense, but that is definitely what happened before. And if you want to check out that video, I can link it at the end of this video so you can check out that experiment and see for yourself. But overall, I have a great knife, and I'm very happy with the end result. I like the copper accent, and overall, I'm very happy with the way it turned out. This knife is available on my website, as well as a couple of cutting boards. If you want to go pick those up, that's a great way to help support the channel. And a like and a subscribe goes a long way, so you make sure that you are subscribed. And if you like the video, like the video. And as always, guys, I really appreciate you guys watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.